Over 15 years after the first muscle car era had subsided in the United States, horsepower was beginning to climb once again. By 1987, the Corvette's 350 cubic inch V8 had increased in peak horsepower from 200 horsepower in 1982 to 245 just a few years later, and the Ferrari Testarossa was knocking on the door of 390 horsepower with its flat 12 as well. Performance was on an upswing. However, muscle cars were still many years away from matching the power output of their late great 1960s ancestors, all except for one car. See, while GM was struggling to squeeze more than 250 horsepower out of their 5.7-liter V8s, another manufacturer would be building the most unlikely luxury muscle car of them all. With a ground-pounding 430 horsepower coming from its naturally aspirated 5.3-liter V8, this was the hottest factory V8-powered car around. And it wasn't even coming from the Big Three or the United States at all. 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean, Aston Martin was cooking up a masterpiece in old-school speed, and it would be referred to simply as the V8 Vantage X-Pack, whose origins could be traced all the way back to 1967. See, Aston Martin in the years prior had seen a meteoric run-up in brand recognition thanks to the likes of the one and only James Bond. The DB5 was the it car of the world just a few years earlier. But with the DB5 and DB6 cars being just a further update of the aging DB4 platform, it was evident that this design was becoming a bit antiquated and too small for the demand of the ever-changing grand touring market. And as such, the choice was made to fully redesign Aston Martin's flagship car from the ground up. And by 1967, the Aston Martin DBS arrived, offering more speed, more comfort, and more space than its predecessor. The DBS was an elegant gentleman's car like any self-respecting Aston should be. But there was something a bit more sinister about this body style. It was wider, more muscular, and it carried itself differently on the road. It had some attitude to it, but its aluminum body was still hand-formed and assembled just like the brand's other cars. It's also alleged that even the quarter panel shape of this new Aston DBS was very heavily inspired by that period of American muscle cars in the 60s. And its new boxy front end with that wide front grille screamed muscle more than it did opulence. And that's because initially this new DBS was designed to fit Aston Martin's all-new 5.3-liter aluminum dual overhead cam V8. Designed by Tadek Marek, who was Aston Martin's Polish engine wizard, this new engine would be Aston's first ever V8. And as such, they wanted to get it right, which also meant taking their time, so a production-ready version of this engine took longer than expected. As a result, the DBS was sold with the old DB6 inline 6-cylinder engine at first, and it didn't get this brand new V8 that was made for it until 1969. Now, the inline 6 was still a strong performer, making around 280 horsepower, and it was silky smooth, but it lacked the grunt that this body style really needed. When the new Aston Martin V8 finally made its way into the production DBS cars, it made a respectable 360 horsepower with its Bosch fuel injection system. Now, V8 power output-wise, this was right on par with the highest performance American V8s of the same time with similar displacements. Not bad for Aston Martin's first V8 go-around. 360 foot-pounds of torque were also on tap with this motor at 4,500 RPM, which gave the Aston a fantastic amount of mid-range shove. With the DBS's new chassis design that featured a DD-on rear axle, vented disc brakes, and an optional 5-speed manual transmission, this car catapulted Aston Martin into the next decade. 0 to 60 happened in 6 seconds, and the top speed stood at a lofty 160 miles per hour, thanks to the 5 forward gears and the 354-to-1 rear gear ratio. A 3-speed automatic was also available as a transmission option, but it severely hampered performance. The 5-speed was what you wanted to have. However, that fuel injection system that I mentioned earlier that seemed so cutting edge for the time actually caused a myriad of issues. So many, in fact, that Aston actually reverted the later cars back to a carbureted setup because of all the issues they faced with it. They eventually figured it out later on, but it took them a while of just making carbureted cars first. Visually, the DBS V8 cars remained pretty much the same until 1973, which was when the new facelifted cars arrived, affectionately referred to as the Series 2 cars or just the Aston Martin V8s, no longer the DBS V8s. These got a redesigned front fascia that ditched the flat one-piece grille and quad headlight setup for a much simpler and more elegant single headlight setup on each side with a separated grille, and in my opinion, this body looks way better. Power dropped to 310 horsepower by 1973, and as the years progressed, tightening emissions laws choked the Astons out to a mid-200 horsepower peak power range. By the mid-1970s, Aston offered a new Stage 1 engine option, which brought peak power back up to 305 horsepower thanks to a reworked exhaust and new cams. Entering into 1977, the Aston Martin V8 would embark on an upward trajectory that would end up bringing us the baddest version yet. The Aston Martin V8 Vantages debuted in 1977, bringing with them a further redesigned front end with a blocked off-center grille and enclosed hood bulge with 2 large fog lamps in the middle of what used to be the grille. This new rework made the car even more aggressive looking, and under the hood there were big performance gains as well. The carburetors were changed and upgraded to larger 48mm IDF Webers that were mounted on redesigned intake manifolds. Along with these changes, the engine received larger valves, modified exhaust manifolds, updated camshafts, and an increased compression ratio. These mods altogether allowed the 5.3-liter V8 to produce around 380 horsepower, though Aston Martin modestly described the power output as adequate at the time. The suspension for the Vantages was also overhauled with adjustable Coney dampers, shorter springs, and a thicker anti-roll bar, plus the addition of new wider tires. The interiors were also fitted with upgraded materials, fully completing the new Vantage package. Now, for the late 1970s, 380 horsepower was criminally fast. 0 to 60 was now in the 5-second range, and the top speed was knocking on the door of 170 miles per hour. Not bad for a nearly 4,000-pound car back then. It was miles faster than any American V8 at the time, and in fact, it was miles faster than everything, because in 1977, the V8 Vantage was the fastest production car in the world. And there was still more to give, because fast forward a few years to 1986, and the pinnacle of naturally aspirated V8 performance worldwide was here, in the form of the V8 Vantage X-Pack. Named for its 580X engine designation, this new motor would be the best yet, thanks to further improvements made by Aston like new Cosworth pistons, larger carburetors, larger intake ports, a revised intake manifold, and further upgraded cams. Peak power was now bumped to a whopping 432 horsepower. 0 to 60 was now in the low 5s, and the top speed was over 170. From the already crazy Vantage to the now even more insane V8 Vantage X-Pack, it was clear that Aston Martin had built Britain's first true supercar. Power-wise, the Aston outclassed the Countach and the Ferrari Testarossa, and offered similar performance figures, albeit offering way more practicality, 2 extra seats, and a much more luxurious interior. This car was really the jack of all trades, and it truly might have been the only time in history that on the basis of pure performance, Aston Martin outclassed all of its other rivals. And to be honest, for $120,000 US in 1987 money, this car better have. The only shame is that just 137 X-Pack cars were built according to RM Sotheby's, before the car was phased out for the new Virage and Vantage of the early 90s, which means that your chance of seeing an actual real factory X-Pack car are slim to none. Thankfully, though, Aston Martin Works, who essentially are the factory-supported classic Aston wizards, offer services today to upgrade their V8s into X-Pack specifications and beyond. We're talking a 6.3-liter, near 500 horsepower version of that iconic Aston V8 for the man who needs the pinnacle of luxury performance. But of course, that performance doesn't come cheap. Now, the main reason that I wanted to cover this car in a video is twofold. Number one, because it is without a doubt my favorite looking car ever made. And number two, when you put this car in the context of the time it was made, it really was just a muscle car in a suit. And I may get flack for saying that, but I don't mean it in a bad way. Sure, it's an Aston, it's elegant, it's expensive, and it's handmade. But a carbureted V8 with a manual transmission and rear-wheel drive, it doesn't really get any more classic muscle than that. Especially with the looks of this generation Aston car, it really does look like just a better put together, more sculpted version of a muscle car. So that begs the question, is this classic Aston truly the ultimate luxury muscle car, or is it just an overpriced alternative? Let me know in the comments down below. But that about wraps it up for this video. Again, thank you all for watching another video. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps me out. Until next time, enthusiasts.